Well, South African Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee decided to keep the repo rate unchanged at 8.25%. The country's state of the economy remains a concern. Very recent statistics, in fact, show that approximately 30 million people, that's half of the nation, are living at or below the national upper poverty line. Meanwhile, amongst other challenges like load shedding, high inflation, the country is also battling water woes in various parts of the country, of course, leaving more in desperate situations. How does one avoid debt whilst living under these conditions? Perhaps to take these discussions further, we're going to be joined by teams by CEO of Debt Rescue South Africa, Annaline van der Poel. Annaline, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here on the SABC at this hour.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Annaline, let's just look at the recent repo rate that's obviously now going to be holding steady, at least at 8.25%, in line with predictions by analysts and economists. Talk to us about the reality of that on the ground at this point, and whether South Africans will be able to hold on until there is an eventual cut of note.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. Obviously we're thankful for not seeing increases, but realistically speaking, we're desperate to see decreases, and unfortunately the Reserve Bank governor has made it abundantly clear that until we stabilize inflation at the 4.5 mark, which we are unfortunately not close to, we won't be seeing these decreases. And for us as consumers, what that means is our debt might not necessarily be going up because the interest rates are at least stable right now. Inflation is eroding what's left of our paycheck at the end of the day because the cost of living keeps increasing. So we desperately are in need of relief, and ideally in the form of, if no other way, at least getting the interest rates down. But we need the inflation to stabilize. So it's very, very tough out there at the moment.
Absolutely. And what are your thoughts or reactions to the fuel hike that's set to come into effect next week, Wednesday, perhaps also this Easter long weekend? What are some of the trends that you're also witnessing at this point as well in terms of retail sector, whether it's positive or negative?
Unfortunately, it's negative. There's no other way to look at it. We've got to look at the fact that each time we see a fuel price increase, it affects, businesses. Obviously, we know that transport, everything is by road. We know that it affects the cost of transport of goods, which means goods prices are going to go up. For us as consumers, when we look at how we use our own personal transport, that obviously goes up. So it's definitely not a positive thing each time the fuel price keeps going up. It's sitting at incredibly record highs at the moment, and it's putting a massive strain on us. So we are really feeling the pressure from all sides, and for businesses especially. I mean, they're not really in the position, fuel, diesel's not going up by that much per se, but it's an increase once again. And we know that a lot of businesses have had to turn to alternative forms of electricity to, during load shedding to keep their businesses running. And a lot of times, if it's not solar, it's going to be on generators which use diesel. So costs just keep climbing, and inevitably us as the consumers are the ones who are bearing the brunt of it.
Absolutely. Actually, staying on price increases, I wonder if you could speak to the reality on the ground with relation to the prices of staple foods such as milk, eggs, chicken, meat, etc. I mean, what are the trends you're observing on that front? And at this point, given the high cost of living, how should government and even retailers be stepping in to assist at this point?
We've obviously had a whole host of factors that have affected us, especially if you mention eggs, for example. We know the avian flu has still got that knock-on effect. How much more expensive eggs are in comparison to 12 months ago. That is a staple. It's a cheap protein for many, as is chicken. So, what we really need right now is we need government to look at methods in which they can help to obviously stimulate the economy. We've got to make sure that we get load shedding under control once and for all. Make sure that businesses can keep their doors open, their lights on, and keep people employed. And more than that, that we create an environment where employment becomes a reality. The biggest problem we are sitting with over 32% unemployment in this country. People are not earning incomes. They are not able to actually afford the basic goods out there. We're seeing consumers turning to credit to put food on table. Very, very disturbing, and we need stimulus of the economy so that job creation can become a reality.
No, absolutely. Let's unpack a little bit further. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about the underlying issue of the total cost of household, that household basket relative to income of households. Expanded on that, though, I mean, trends amongst supermarkets where people are buying staples on credit. What are the repercussions and concerns on that front from your vantage point?
Well, obviously, we've seen, year on year, if we look at what, institutions like PNB, EJD are telling us, we know that it's increased significantly and because of inflation. And what that is meaning to the average consumer is, unfortunately, they are quite literally what we are seeing and what our research is telling us is consumers are turning to two forms of credit to quite literally put the food on the table. And that's either in the form of store credit cards, or alternatively payday loans, the loan they take a couple of days after payday to fund them through to the next one. Either way, if you're buying food on credit, it means you're consuming something you haven't paid for yet, plus you're paying interest on it. So it's really very worrying, but we realize why consumers are doing this. They're in such a tough spot. They have no alternative. They need to feed their families, and this is the only way in which they can do it. But the cost of living crisis is still with us, and we can see it in the supermarkets.
And so as we look, about reprieve options, a cut in the repo rate, what are you predicting at this point? I also just want to look at some of the solutions at this point to take pressure off of disposable income. What advice do you have for South Africans who are living on credit? How should they also be aware of their rights within the National Credit Act at large?
Well, I think it's really important that, when it comes to, what our rights are in terms of consumers. Really important knowing that, from a credit perspective is knowing, for example, that you have the right to one free credit report per annum. Google it, look for your credit reports, and just have a look at what's going on there. Make sure that the information that's portrayed there is correct. And that is the first point to start getting control of your personal finance if perhaps there's something wrong, or also to see where your opportunities are, maybe to make some changes, and really to do an analysis to see, can you afford more credit? Are you able to service those minimum installments? And from a tips and recommendation advice, I think it's really imperative that as consumers we are honest with ourselves in terms of we have to plan more than we have ever had to do so in the past. We have to plan. We've got to see where every cent goes. We've got to take bank statements a couple of months worth and literally see where is every cent that I get in. Where is it going? And are there opportunities for me to cut down, make changes in my lifestyle habits, maybe let go of some services I don't need, anything that can help reduce the pressure and make sure that you've got money in the bank. And then obviously, if you've got debt, try and pay it off as quickly as you possibly can, because obviously you've got interest that's being charged there. And if you've done all of that and you still are struggling, to look for help in the form of debt counseling.
Annaline, thank you for joining us on the SABC at this hour and for weighing in. We'll leave that conversation there. Annaline van der Poel, CEO of Debt Rescue SA, really just weighing in on the impact of South Africa's economy on consumers at large. We're looking at ways to avoid debt in the wake of a fuel hike that's scheduled for next week, Wednesday, on the back of the MPC that has announced the repo rate will be maintained at 8.25%. And of course, just looking at some of the other dynamics affecting South Africans at large. Again, thank you to her for joining in.